3 years ago, there was no one in these streets. The streets of Phnom Penh, capital of Kampuchea. The now deposed Khmer Rouge regime drove millions into the country. Millions more who objected were slaughtered. Today, Kampuchea is under a different socialist regime, backed by the Vietnamese. Resistance groups still cause security problems, but there's much evidence that Kampuchea and its capital are returning to normal. During past conflicts, many fled. They fled the 1975 coup by the Khmer Rouge. 4 years later, they fled the fighting after the Vietnamese-backed invasion that deposed the Khmer Rouge. And then they fled the famine that followed that. Now, greater stability at home is persuading many of those 700,000 Kampuchean refugees to return, mostly from neighboring Thailand or Vietnam. Already, over 300,000 have returned in the 2 years since the overthrow of the Khmer Rouge. Some international aid officials say the figure could be as high as 500,000. The returnees are mostly peasants, mostly women and children. Here's just one of them. This woman returned in January with her 3 children. They'd been in a camp on the Thai border, where, she says, life was difficult. She couldn't sleep at night, she was so afraid. People were panicking there, there was fighting. Now, she says, there's been a good rice harvest in Kampuchea, so she's returned, as she puts it, to find a few grains to feed her kids. The upheavals in Kampuchea have split families. This girl was lucky. Her parents survived the Khmer Rouge regime. Now she's back from a refugee camp to help them. She's glad to be home, but feels sad she's had to leave her brother and his family at the camp. To make returning easier for the refugees, the government has established transit centers, like this one near the Thai border. When returnees emerge from the border forests, officials transfer them here. It's not just another refugee camp. The average stay here is often just a few days, rarely more than a month. Officials assess their needs, give them political and civic education about the present regime. Then they give the returnees a little rice and cash and allow them to go on home. In each town, official reception committees and Kampuchean Red Cross representatives support and integrate them. But the transit centers can't make the first stage of the return any safer. This man told us his journey had been dangerous. Groups of soldiers and bandits had extorted money from him. This transit center is for resistance fighters who've decided to defect. Re-education here is longer and more thorough. Over 400 soldiers have been here for more than 2 months. They'll be released only when the authorities feel they're loyal. This man was a resistance leader for the anti-communist Khmer Rouge. He felt defection had been a wise move. He said he looked forward to fighting for the Vietnamese-backed regime in Kampuchea, and that'll mean fighting his former resistance colleagues, as well as the guerrilla forces of the deposed Khmer Rouge administration. The UN High Commission for Refugees is playing a major role in the resettlement program. The goal of its multi-million-dollar operation is to help returnees integrate into their home villages as self-supporting families. In Phnom Penh, aid workers load individual kits containing basic tools for survival. A UN worker supervises, but it's the Kampuchean Red Cross who'll distribute the kits to returnees. 2 years ago, at the height of Kampuchea's famine, the government had insisted on controlling aid distribution to ensure none of it reached guerrilla forces. The controversy and friction that caused seemed to be absent from this refugee resettlement program. But in other ways, the UN operation is controversial. For the non-communist countries of Southeast Asia, fear the program could legitimize the present Kampuchean regime. Not that they ever approved of the deposed Khmer Rouge. But, they say, the present administration is illegitimate because it originated in a Vietnamese invasion, an alleged violation of international frontiers. They're concerned recognition of Phnom Penh would set a fearful precedent. They fear the powerful Soviet-backed Vietnamese army. So they, and the US also, accept the resettlement program with reluctance. In response, the UN says voluntary repatriation is the best solution for the refugees. Out near the Vietnamese border, workers distribute the kits to returnees. It's very basic aid. The kits contain just a few household tools. But they're still vital for people who've crossed the border and brought almost nothing with them to start a new life. A similar scene on the other side of the country, near the Thai border. Most returnees come from camps in Thailand. Some receive slightly more sophisticated kits containing farm tools, pesticides, fertilizer. It's reported the floating population of Kampucheans living in camps along the Thai border has dropped from 500,000 in late 1979 to about 80,000 now. That's the scale of the return. And the Thai government must be glad of that exodus. The Kampucheans threatened to flood Thailand, searching for food. And, more important, they were a possible pretext for a cross-border intervention by Vietnamese forces. The Kampuchean government may well have reservations about the returnees. Despite the political re-education in transit centers, Phnom Penh fears many returnees may still sympathize with the guerrillas and could join opposition anti-communist or Khmer Rouge forces. The UN kit distribution was in the grounds of a Buddhist temple. And a funeral ceremony later underscored just how the country has changed. Under the feudal-style Khmer Rouge regime, any expression of religious faith was banned. Now it's become once again a part of people's lives, and a sign that individual rights are being protected. This is one index of the return to normality that's still in progress. Here's another, a Roman Catholic service. The deacon leading his congregation told us he resumed services just 3 months after the overthrow of the Khmer Rouge. For the families here, this is a new beginning, a sign that community life and faith have largely returned to the villages. The sense of community is vital here. Reports indicate the help returnees receive from fellow villagers is the single most important factor in their successful integration. Parts of the country are not so stable. This woman told us she could no longer travel to visit the refugee camps over the Thai border. The trip had become too dangerous. And not, in her case, because of bandits. For in outlying districts, bitter fighting continues between government forces and guerrilla groups. the country is still in a civil war, despite the presence of an estimated 200,000 Vietnamese troops in Kampuchea today. It's in Phnom Penh that the signs of a return to normal are most obvious. Here, there are no major security problems. Events in the capital reflect the political style of the present regime. Beside the former royal palace, an industrial exhibition, evidence of the encouragement that's now being given to private enterprise. There was no place for that in the peasant economy set up by the Khmer Rouge, where even money was abolished. The economy now is still socialist, but it's free enough to attract the refugees back. International aid has helped Kampuchea. It reached $600 million last year, the highest total since World War II. Without it, markets like this might not exist. The food situation is a major reason for the influx of returnees. 2 years ago, before emergency aid poured in, people in Kampuchea were starving. That was the catastrophic legacy inherited from 4 years of Khmer Rouge power. Today, you've only to look around to see that food is readily available. And as the returnees flow back, they've been welcome in the underexploited farm areas near the borders. Areas where there's little animal power and no tractors, and so a need for more farm laborers. That, in turn, should further improve food availability. The country is now moving towards self-reliance. These curbside vaccination sessions are just one sign of a health service which Kampucheans themselves organize and run. They've taken over this task from international aid agencies. But Kampuchean officials say they still need aid, and they're concerned about impending cuts. They're proud of the rebuilding that's been done already, but they warn returnees not to expect too much. Rice production throughout the country has more than doubled in 2 years, but it's still only 850,000 tons. Kampuchea needs 1 million tons to feed its people. It even used to export rice before the wars, before the famine. But maybe the most striking challenge for the peasant returnees will be adjusting to the Quam Samakis, the cooperative farms. The head of one Quam Samaki near the Thai border told us each family had its own plot, but the families also help farm large collective land areas. The cooperatives receive returnees with nowhere else to go. They help them build shelters, give them food, and integrate them. Cooperatives like this seem well suited to the needs of the returnees, who often arrive with no money or property. Compared with the Khmer Rouge, it's a painless way of spreading socialist principles. But opposition still exists. The exiled Prince Sihanouk has made proposals that may one day unite the opposition guerrillas, the anti-communist Khmer Serai and the pro-Chinese Khmer Rouge. That could heighten armed conflict here and worsen security. Abroad, the Kampuchean regime still awaits unanimous recognition. And yet hundreds of thousands of returning refugees seem an indication of the country's growing stability, of confidence in the future. For them, opportunities here are greater now than for many years. Whatever political disputes lie ahead, they're back, and they mean to stay.